Welcome to the third and last part of Julian of Norwich, a 14th century mystic for our time, where we're reflecting on the wisdom of Julian of Norwich and how it's an inspiration to us at this time of uncertainty and of lockdown. In the last two talks, I looked at Julian's life and also at the revelations she received while she was sick. And this talk will be looking at the long text, which is the reflection on the meaning of the revelations, which it took 20 years of her while she was living in self-isolation as an anchoress to reflect on the meaning of these experiences she had during her sickness and to write the long text, which gives the deepest interpretation of the revelations. I'm going to bring up the slides again. The long text is also called A Showing of Love. It's what we can see about these different versions is you have the sickness and the original visions that came to her, which were visions and locutions, and then we have the writing of those out in the first text, which is the revelation, which is her understanding of what is being revealed in those visions. And then as the time goes on, over the time as an anchoress, her time in solitude, she reflected more and more on the meaning of these revelations in its ever widening circles. So that the long text includes nearly all of the shorter text. I mean, there are differences, but it includes the account of the visions and the revelations, but then gives this longer reflection on the meaning. And she also says that the meaning is endless. So the long text, in some sense, is there's always more to it. And people find that when they're reading Julian of Norwich, they can read her and reread her, and always find something more. There's a sort of abundance of meaning. So I've the meaning circle here I've left open, because although the revelations were given, the meaning is continuously expanding. Just a brief word on the transmission of these texts. You see there, you have the short text. Both the original manuscripts written in the late 14th century. We don't have the original manuscripts. We have quite an early copy of the short text in the 15th century. And that comes down to us. The long text there must have been various copies which have again been lost. And so we don't actually have copies the early until the 17th century. These are the earliest copies we have. We have one which was in the Paris manuscript and one English manuscript, and they each have variations which need to are not very big. But there's also is the French manuscript sort of puts it in a more mainstream English, whereas the English one has some of the dialect still of the East Anglian. So anyway, reading them, it's important to know that we're working with different manuscripts. The first publication of Julian's text that we can see here is the Cressy manuscript. Cressy, which was a publisher in the 17th century, who published this Paris manuscript in the first published form, and so that's when it started to become known. But for most of its the period of from its original writing in the 13th century up until modern times, it hasn't been known. It's only really a text that has become popular and famous in the 20th century. Now we have various versions publications, and she's become a mystic for our time. She wasn't so well known in her time. You can tell by the number of manuscripts and the fact that they weren't kept; they've been lost. But now she has come into her own era. So again, the expansion of the vision into the revelation and into the meaning of the revelation. That's what we're looking at now. The first sort of reflection on meaning that comes out is this sense of God in creation. We can see it in the revelation, the vision of the small size of the hazelnut, the ball, in the palm of the hand. And in the long text, Julian reflects on a bit more theologically on the meaning of this, that God is preserving and holding all creation. She writes this: "Blessed are you, Lord, you created everything for love, and by your will it is preserved, and always will be without end. Lord, you are everything which is good, and the goodness which is in everything is you." This sense that if we're looking for God, we will find God in the goodness of all things. God is the goodness of everything. And this theology that Julian comes to is one where God is within creation and we find God there. In this sense, we saw in the Revelations that God is like our clothing, wrapping us in love. Julian sees God as a mother, the one who cares for us, nurtures us, protects us, feeds us in the sacraments, but in all natural ways, and keeps us from harm. And this is why he sees particularly as Jesus as mother, because Jesus takes on the human condition completely. The physical aspect of the human condition is the person of the Trinity that becomes flesh. And this is why Jesus is seen as taking on this mothering quality. Julian never contrasts mother with father, so she's not trying to play down God as father, but she says that image needs to be balanced, that God is as much a mother as God is father. God enjoys that he is our mother as much as he enjoys that he is our father. And Jesus is our mother, in whom we are endlessly born. This sense in Julian that we are being born into Christ, that Christ is the mother who is bearing us into Christian life. And so she expands further on this sense of being clothed by God. God serves us in our most humble needs. That we meet God, Julian feels, not so much in the extraordinary things, but in the natural things of life, in the people we love, in having meals together. She even says in the process of having to go to the toilet, God is there in that, in all our most humble needs, our most natural needs, because God is with us, substantially with us. And Julian says, "For as the body is clad in the cloth, in our clothes, and the flesh in the skin, and the bones in the flesh, and the heart in the chest, so are we, soul and body, clad in the goodness of God and enclosed in it." The goodness of God surrounds everything. And in this text, you see that you're going deeper and deeper into yourself. You start with the clothes, the flesh, the skin, and then the bones, and then the heart in the center. And at each stage, the whole person is God is present there, deeper and deeper within. The reflection she comes to, she looks at these revelations and she sees there's no anger in God. I saw no kind of wrath in God, neither for a short time nor for a long. For truly as I see it, if God were to be angry, even a hint, we would neither have life nor place nor being. If God is the hand which holds the little ball, which is so fragile, if for one moment he was angry and clenched his fist, we will be gone. The fact that God is never angry, is always protecting us, nurturing us, is always loving us. So Julian is an excellent antidote to any images we may have taken with us of a punishing God. This idea, sometimes in the present circumstance with this pandemic, that God is somehow punishing us, that would be a long way from Julian's way of understanding. God is present in creation, present in human suffering. God is in no way standing above it or using it as a means. The human suffering and the whole of creation is part of God. So she said, where does this anger come from? Because we experience anger, it doesn't come from God. She sees that this anger is in us. Here we have a man who's angry, and this anger is on our side. And God forgives this anger in us, because wrath or anger is nothing else but a perversity and an opposition to peace and to love. Something in us which opposes peace and love, and that is this anger. And it comes from a lack, something in our being. Maybe as a child we lacked this fullness, a lack of power, a lack of wisdom, a lack of goodness. Something was deficient in us. And this lack is not in God, but it's in our side. So only God can't be angry, because there's no lack from which God suffers from. But we do, and we have this anger because of that. And God looks at us, Julian famously says, with pity, not with blame. It is not God sees the lack which is causing the anger. So Julian is aware that because of our weaknesses, sometimes we can fall into dejection. We can be too self-accusatory. We can think that God doesn't love us because we're angry, or because we're whatever weaknesses we have. And Julian feels that it's important that we don't take these, blame ourselves. If God doesn't blame us, then why should we blame ourselves? It's not God's intention that we should go to great lengths in our self-accusation. I mean, we should face up to things in ourselves and be sorry for things, but not push it to the level of guilt or low self-esteem. So we shouldn't feel wretched about ourselves. Every time he means us to look at once to him. So every time we feel we've fallen, is to turn to God and know that we are loved in spite of it all. And this is the reassurance of Julian. The great meaning of the revelation is that is a meaning of comfort, that all is well, all will be well, and all manner of things will be well. This is because God is substantially united to us. So even our bodies will be kept in safety. So these worries and anxieties we have, she says, if we turn immediately to God, then they are lessened, because this connection to God is, which we call prayer, is this realization that there is something more than us, which is caring for us, that we don't need to be so anxious about our lives. this experience of prayer, Julian goes into it, that the problem with prayer is that at times we turn to God and we feel God's presence and we feel that reassurance and consolation and that God has heard our prayers, but often it's not the case. Often we turn to God and we are faced with this sense of absence, sense of God being just this great absence. And most of us who practice meditation know that we don't always feel the presence of God. But Julian says the real prayer really starts when we are committed to it in all circumstances, whether we feel consolation or are just turning to God without necessarily finding that. Because the connection with God is not so much what we're getting out of God, it's about union with God. So we're not so much looking for a reassurance, we're bringing our weakness, we're bringing our need for God to God, and we are being filled with God. Now that is so beyond what we can actually taste and feel and see, because God is beyond anything we can imagine. So at times that infilling with God feels like an emptiness. It feels like a hollowing out rather than a filling up. But that is because the God is beyond anything we can perceive. She writes this beautiful prayer about this, what this wholehearted prayer is. Lord, I want to pray with all my heart, even though it seems this has no savor to me. It is profitable for me, even though I may not feel it so. So the meditation is profitable even if we don't feel it's achieving something. I want to pray with all my heart. It's this generosity of self-giving, which is the heart of prayer. Though I may feel nothing, though I may see nothing, yes, though I think I could not, or in dryness and barrenness, in sickness and weakness, my prayer is most pleasing to you, though it is almost tasteless to me. And so is all living prayer in your sight. Julian's theology, as we've seen, is based on this the passion and the resurrection being, there's no moment between them. They are instantaneous, and the passion is the resurrection, but it transformed into joy. And that is also in our prayer. And sometimes the barrenness, the weakness, the emptiness is the fullness. And we don't always realize it, although sometimes we're given this glimpse that actually it's the fullness of God we are experiencing in the silence and stillness of our meditation, where sometimes even if it feels nothing is happening, that is the process which is going on. Julian, in the long text, adds a last revelation, which isn't actually in the short text. That's why I said there were 17 revelations in Julian's showings, 17 of these associated imagery. But the 17th is in the long text, the short text only has 16. And the reason is because when she had this showing at the time, when she was 30 years old, she didn't really understand it. It was like, I suppose, like a dream which we have, which we can't make head or tail of. So she just sort of left it, but she remembered it, but she didn't write it out in the short version as if she couldn't make head or tail of it. But actually, after the 20 years in her isolation, reflecting on it, she made sense of it, or felt she made more sense of it, although the meaning is endless. And partly it was through a word given to her that she should look at the details in this showing, and the details would reveal the meaning. Now, I can't go into all the details because it's a very rich parable, and one of the richest parts of Julian's reflection. But basically, the showing was of a servant and the master, and the servant is standing at the left side of the master, and he goes off to do his master's will. He goes off with great joy because he just wants to do what the master says. And he runs off and he falls into a pit. And he's quite distraught because he's in pain and very suffering. He's injured himself. He's in the dark, and the worst is that he feels he's failed his master and that he hasn't done the errand that he was told to do. And he's in he can only see his own suffering. And Julian says it's like that when we're suffering. We see all this and we think that we're to blame and all this sort of stuff. If only we could lift our eyes. And she says if the servant could have lifted his eyes out of the pit, he would see that the master was there to comfort him. In fact, to reward him for his intention to go and help, and the fact that he has been injured in the way. So actually the master is with him all the time, loving and caring for him. And this she sees as a parable of how we can feel distressed, like in the present situation. But if we lift our eyes a little higher, we might see God's care for us, even when things seem to have gone wrong. This is a drawing. The servant has fallen into the pit there, and but the loving gaze of God is always with us, and if we can lift our eyes, we will find that loving gaze, that God never judges us. In fact, rewards us for the suffering that we go through in life. It makes us love Him more. And this is the pit. So we're looking out, and sometimes we can feel like at the moment we're in the pits and we don't know what's going on and we're suffering, and this is the reassurance. And there's a great depths of meaning in this parable that Julian adds, that the servant who has fallen into the pit is Christ also, who has come into this world. And we are united with Christ in our sufferings. And Jesus God doesn't judge or blame us any more than he judges or blames Christ, totally blameless through all these things. And in fact, God sees the good intention. We always have within us this will, this intention, which is always unsullied by selfishness. We actually have this goodness inviolate within us. And today, in today's world, we can still see that, the goodness of the care workers, the hospital workers, the staff, nurses and doctors who are entering into the suffering of the world, and God sees that incredible goodness. At the end of the long text, she tries to sum up what the meaning of these revelations, or at least the direction of the meaning is. And this God speaks to her at the end. Would you know our Lord's meaning in this thing? Would you know what God is trying to show? Know it well. Love was his meaning. Who showed it to you? Love. Meaning of everything that happens is love, and it is shown by love. And what did he show you? Love. What is shown is love. It's not just the meaning, it's the actual everything. And why did he show it to you? For love. In the cosmos, everything is given as a showing of love. Why creation was made. Why everything happens is a revealing that love is the energy behind the universe. Love is the gravity that draws us together, and the light that illumines. And this is Dante and Beatrice gazing into heaven, great parable of love, but Julian gets this revelation: hold yourself in this, in what she has been shown, and you shall perceive and know more in the same. You shall know more and more love, but you shall never perceive nor know in this anything different without end. There's nothing except love being revealed. There is no other thing happening. There's no good and bad. There is only love. And this is the deepest mystery which Dante discovers with gazing into heaven. It's the realms of love. And she ends the long text with this reflection on who we really are, where our real being is. In this, I was taught that love was our Lord's meaning. Before God made us, he loved us, which love was never abated and never will be. So this love God has for us has always been there and will always be there. It's not as if God loved us like when we came into the world. God has always loved us. We existed always in God, in God's love. That is where our real being is. Like a child coming into the world, it's as if all of us have come from this mother who has always loved us. And our passage in this life is part of that mothering, but it's a mothering which will always be there because it's never not been there. And that is what eternity is. This holding of us in love. So Julian says, in our creation we had a beginning in time, but the love in which God created us was in him from without beginning. The love in which God created us was in God from without beginning. And in this love, he has done all his works. In this love, he has made all things profitable to us. In this faithful love is life forever. Our discovery of the fullness of life is a discovery of our lovableness, eternal lovableness, that God has always loved us. And this is really the revelation that Julian is given, is this revelation of love for creation, a revelation of love despite all the sufferings, turning all the sufferings into joy, a revelation of love that gives a sense that God is not just someone who's asking something from us, but someone who's uniting, becoming one with us. And revelation is of the substantial oneness we have with God, like a child with its mother, that they are of one flesh. And we have that gift of God given to us. And it is the love which we have been given in us, which is the love of God. So I hope in this time of uncertainty, we can maybe revisit Julian and find consolation and reassurance there. A consolation which doesn't avoid the suffering, It's not Julian is grapples with suffering and with sin. She's not ignoring it, but she sees the bigger picture, that something is being revealed about the nature of God in and through all this. And that's her great message to us. So I hope you enjoyed these talks. God bless.